This regular meeting of Medicine Hat City Council is hereby called to order at 6:30 p.m. on February 21st, 2023. We will begin with a moment of prayer or reflection. Thank you. Now I'd like to read the city's land acknowledgement. The City of Medicine Hat acknowledges that we live and work on treaty territory. The city pays respect to all Indigenous peoples and honors their past, present, and future. We recognize and respect their cultural heritages and relationships to the land. Are there any councillor announcements this evening? Seeing none, we will move on to adoption of the agenda. We have 2 items to add, and they are item 13.5, Medicine Hat Police Service Collective Bargaining, and item 13.6, Public Member Appointments. Any other additions? Seeing none, we will adopt the agenda as amended. Moving on to the adoption of the minutes of regular City Council meeting of February 6, 2023. Any errors or omissions? Seeing none, Council adopts the minutes of the February 6, 2023 City Council meeting as presented. We have no public hearings this evening, so we will move on to item 9, administrative presentation, and that is 2023 assessment roll overview. And we have Susan, yes, our city assessor, Susan Sturkenberg. It's quite an alliteration.
Good evening, Your Worship and council members. Assessment notices will be arriving in the mail next week. We may have ratepayers that have questions, and I'm happy to present to you the assessment results of the changes in the assessment values over the last year. January 31st, the assessment roll was declared. And when we say declared, that means that the assessment values were finalized and they met the quality standards of the provincial government based on the legislation and regulations. When I say roll, that just means a list of all the properties, including assessment values, assessed persons, a property description to describe the land and improvements, the assessment class, and the exemption or taxation. The assessment notices will be mailed on February 28th, and we do separate out our assessment notices. That's been since the year 2012 that we've separated out the tax notice and the assessment notice. And that's to help our ratepayers to know the value of the assessed value, and that way we can have some of those any questions resolved before we actually set the tax rate by law, and we'd like to have that finalized tax rates by May 1st. There is a 60-day complaint period, which is clearly identified on the assessment notice. May 8th is that date, and it's outlined in a red box. May 19th is when the tax notices will come out, and taxes will be due June 30th. Or ratepayers have the option of entering into a monthly installment plan, and that can be, any interested property owners can contact customer service, or they can find information on the website under the tax installment payment plan, or TIP, T-I-P-P. This three-step process, council's involved in step 1 and 3. Council set the tax rate revenue bylaw, or tax rate budget as of December 19th, 2022. The second step is mainly what we'll focus on tonight in this presentation, and that is the assessor has assigned or calculated dollar value to each property for the purpose of property taxation. And that is done on a yearly basis. The third step is council will be approving the tax rates to allocate amongst all our property types, and we anticipate that happening by May 1st. Who's involved in assessment and what is their role? Both council and assessors are governed by the legislation, Part 9 of the Municipal Government Act, that details the assessment of property and its regulations. Council may, by bylaw, subdivide Class 1, which is residential, into numerous categories or unlimited number of subclasses, whatever it deems to be fair and equitable. There has been some work that has been deferred until we hear more information or we understand the impact of the principles of the strong towns before any more work is done around the splitting of Class 1. Class 2 non-residential, it is more limited as far as splitting that into different subclasses, maybe split into vacant non-residential, small business, and other non-residential. We ask that council direct ratepayers to the assessment department or to the city website if ratepayers have any questions. And currently there is no fee for inspection of the assessment roll, and we do post that on our city website. And council each year will pass a supplementary assessment bylaw, which is really a second notice for any new or complete construction. The role of the assessor is to assign assessment classes to each property, and really the duties of the assessor is to prepare in a fair and equitable manner, apply the valuations and standards set out in the regulations, and if no procedures are set out in the regulations, the assessor must consider assessing similar property in a similar manner in the same municipality. When we look at the basis for the assessment values, we are calculating or assigning a dollar value to each property based on either market value or regulated rates. The regulated values and the rates are determined by the province, and we apply those to farmland, linear, railway, designated industrial properties, and machinery and equipment. The market value must be prepared based on mass appraisal, and if I were to define mass appraisal, that's really taking a large number of properties and assessing them at a single time. We stratify similar type properties into groups, and we use a uniform valuation method, and we also allow for statistical testing. 3 years of sales are used in the evaluation. The assessor then determines if the property is exempt or taxable or full or partial tax exemption, and whether it's assessable or non-assessable. July 2022, so the previous July is our valuation date, and we look at the condition of the property as of the end of the year to determine what status, the condition, and characteristics of that property. And then the assessor will assign the assessment class, so some properties may have more than one assessment class attributed to it. The basis for the tax allocation, the assessment value really determines the amount of tax for the ratepayer. These values are determined yearly, on a yearly basis, to ensure that there's fair distribution of our property tax burden. The tax revenue at $84.796 million was determined in December, and we have seen our assessment base grow, which is good news. NR means non-residential, so we saw an increase of $41.3 million. And basically due to physical growth for permits, new construction, renovations, missing inventory that has been added to our assessment values, and a large portion of that was for Unit 17, the power plant. The assessment growth for multifamily, 24.3 million, and for single family, 40.6. So for a total of 106 million in physical growth. The actual amount for that assessment value base is a 1.15% increase, and we had budgeted for 1%. Now that may change in the meantime and before we prepare the tax rate bylaw, and that's due to any revisions or exemption changes that could occur. And we'll bring forward 3 scenarios to City Council for tax impact against or being applied to the different property types. When we talk about the median change to each of the different property types, I'll be explaining what we've seen in the assessment value changes. So just over 29,000 properties. This includes both taxable and exempt, improved and vacant land. 90% of our properties, residential and farmland, fall in the largest category. That's our Class 1. Multifamily, 0.6%. Multifamily is 5 units or more. And non-residential, just under 9% for Class 2. So within our tax rate assessment base, we have just under 10 billion in taxable assessment value. When we talk about median value changes, we're looking at the median is really the midpoint. When we line up all our properties and we look at the frequency from the smallest to the largest, it's really the midpoint. We use that rather than the average because the average may be distorted from any extremes, highs or lows. Looking at our non-residential properties, these are 9% of our properties, but we may have most of the questions coming from this assessment class. Half of these properties are prepared on the cost approach and the other half are on the income approach. What we're dealing with here are those based on the income approach. So 2% median increase in assessment value for both commercial and industrial properties. Hotel motel median change is 0%, so we're seeing half increase and half decrease. Multifamily, 5 units or more, we're seeing 5% increase, and we are seeing rental rates increasing at a greater rate than our expenses or their expenses. And senior multifamily facilities increasing 7%. So what we're seeing overall is stability. There's some shifting within the property types. Some vacancy has dropped slightly, which when it drops, that means that the assessment increases. For the last years during COVID restrictions, we had given some extra adjustments for additional expenses incurred by property owners, and so in some areas we're not seeing evidence of that. COVID effects are still being seen in the hospitality industries such as hotels, and we are seeing some recovery in the motel industry. When we look at the income approach properties and those that have had no inventory changes, so those that have had permits, we've removed them. It totals 1,074 accounts. So we're seeing our median change. The majority of our properties are increasing from 0 to 5%, so 326 properties. If we were to look within our 15% of our median, within that 2%, we're seeing 90% of our properties fall within 15% of our median change. Looking 10% within our median, we're seeing 76% of our properties. So we're seeing some are decreasing and others are increasing. And again, that's due to those factors that I had mentioned with vacancy changes, with some lease rates shifting, and capitalization rates that are changing slightly. So Our evaluation date, as I mentioned before, is July 2022. And looking at today's values, some property owners may see that there's some slightly lower sale prices that are occurring, and that's basically due to the increasing of interest rates and reduced number of sales that we're seeing right now. So just to remember that our evaluation date is the previous July. Single-family homes, which comprises the largest class, that's 90% of our properties. They are increasing 6%, 3 and 4plexes increasing 2%, condominiums 4%, manufactured homes 8%, and manufactured home parks an increase of 5%. If we were to look at a map of the city and divide each of our neighborhoods into sections, this is just for single-family homes. We see the lightest green are 0 to 5% increase. Everything within this map is falling between 0 to 11% range. The next color of green, darker green, is 5 to 10% increase, and the blue-green is 10 to 15% increase. Those areas where we're seeing larger increases, they were part of our reinspection cycle. So mandated by the province of Alberta is to look at 20% of our properties each year. And so these properties haven't been reviewed for 5+ years. We will do that each year, is to look at different neighborhoods that have not been reviewed for several years. So we're seeing it within those properties, there may have been renovations or changes to the property that are either adding or subtracting value. And what we have found to be a very helpful tool for us is to send out surveys to property owners to give them an opportunity to participate in responding back to details about their property. Where those, and they have different options of returning that survey. So either they can do it online or they can fill it out and send it into the office or drop it off. They can also phone our department, and assessors can go through the information with them to give them a hand.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
I'm a little bit, I just need a little bit more explanation. So I understand that the blue areas are the ones that went up the most, 20 to 30%? Is that?
It says 10 to 15%.
10 to 15, sorry. And that's because we reviewed those areas, but doesn't it indicate, like you said it was due to like renovations or whatever, that all of the properties in that area, or most of them, underwent renovations or some kind of change in the structure of their house to warrant an increase?
Thank you. So our median change is 6%. So typically properties, residential properties are going to be increasing market value 6%. In these areas, they're increasing around 10%, so it's just about 4 or 5% higher than the normal. And that is due because we, with the review of these properties, any changes or renovations that have taken place will add value to the property. And so that is increasing, looking at the changes, which could be replacement of exterior finish, windows, plumbing, heating, cabinets, those types of things that are adding value. The assessors will make note of that and add that to the inventory or the details that we have. Property owners that don't return the surveys, we still have assessors that do go out into the field and visit these homes, and where there's no response, they may leave a door hanger to say that the assessor was by, and there may be assumptions that are made as far as any changes that could have taken place.
And then there's a separate category above, like 15% and above, which also is about 100 locations. What generally precipitates that kind of change? Is it like someone built a home on previously unbuilt-out property, or?
So I think what you're referring to maybe is the letters that go out, the 20% or more?
Yep, so on the non-residential distribution slide, just adding up the 4 last bars.
Okay, yeah. And so those could be for various reasons, why there's changes. Either they've fallen below the market value and we need to bring them up. There could be some inventory changes that have been added that were missed previously. And then I'll explain later too with some of those that are increasing 30% or greater, some of the reasons for that.
And lastly, when you say no inventory changes, does that mean, is that because all of the land is already accounted for regardless of whether it has a house or no?
So in this particular, this is for the income producing properties for non-residential, and 30% or greater with the income approach. Vacancy is one of the adjustments. We have some properties, if they've had spaces that have been vacant for 3 years or more, we apply what's called a chronic vacancy, just an extra adjustment over and above the typical. So in some of these cases, we've had these spaces become vacant, or pardon me, we've had some of these spaces become occupied now, so that adjustment has come off. And in other cases, perhaps they haven't returned a request for information that we have sent to property owners. And in another case, we've got an area that is now no longer farmland, but now will be applied as income approach.
Okay, so no inventory changes means that there was nothing dropped off and nothing was added?
No permits that have been taken out.
Okay, are there any other questions at this time? No? Okay, thank you.
May 8th is our complaint deadline, and that's been highlighted on our assessment notice. Over the last 3 years, we'd like to just give an update or a summary as far as the amount of appeals that we've had filed. This is after the complaint date. And in 2022, we had a total of 77 appeals. The LRB is the Local Assessment Review Board, so 5 appeals filed for the Residential Local Assessment Review Board. And all of those appeals that were filed were resolved with the assessor prior to the Assessment Review Board. The CARB stands for Composite Assessment Review Board. With the multifamily properties, there were 28 that were filed, and those were all resolved before the hearing. And non-residential, 44 filed, and 4 appeals that went before the Assessment Review Board, 1 that was confirmed and 1 that was reduced, and 2 that were adjusted from mutual agreement, so 3 that were adjusted. Within the last 10 plus years, our range has been between 30 and 80 appeals each year, other than the year 2013 when we had 145. If we look at the municipal tax loss for 2022, it was $435 million with these properties here, which is slightly down from last year. 457,000 was the municipal tax loss. So property owners are encouraged to review their 2023 assessment notice, and if they have any questions, to contact the assessment department by email, phone, or visiting our office. Many questions can be answered by the assessor prior to an appeal going forward. A property owner who's not responded to the request for information may lose their right to appeal. And just to highlight the fees to file an appeal, a residential appeal is $50. That's for 3 units or less. There is a reduction to $40 if that is filed within 30 days of the sending out of the notice. For all other properties, $650 per property, and a reduction to $520 if filed within 30 days of the assessment notice.
Sorry, go ahead, Councillor McGregor.
Excuse me, thank you, through the chair. Thanks for the presentation thus far. I just had a question around the appeals, and you say that most of them are, there's a mutual agreement to settle. Do you keep any stats about what that looks like usually? Is it usually status quo? Is it usually in favor of the person that appealed? Like, do you actually keep that data or no?
We have the data as far as the valuation. We can provide that as far as, just not sure exactly what you're looking for.
No, I was just curious if, when somebody appeals, it's either they, it's usually because they think their taxes are too high, obviously. So I was just wondering if you kept it. I'm not asking you to go find it, but I just was wondering if you kept the information on how many were, given a little bit of a reduction, or some were given maybe it was assessed higher at the end of the day, or I suppose it was mutually agreed on. That probably wouldn't have happened. So I guess of those two.
Yeah, so on the second line, it'll have less appeals withdrawn, so those had no changes whatsoever.
Okay.
So there was a total of 12. And then the third line is less, the assessments were adjusted by mutual agreement. So it's the one that property owner that had filed, or it could be represented by a tax agent. They're bringing forward information, and if we feel that information's fair and warranted, then there'll be a mutual agreement to reduce the assessment.
Thank you. So it means in almost every case there's a reduction. In that number 61 that's in the total, it usually means by mutual agreement that that's been reduced. Is that right?
Usually there are some cases where we have increased the assessment, but it's very rare.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Van Dyke.
Yes, thank you. And through the chair, I just had a couple of questions. One is on the second page of the briefing note, which is page 13 of the agenda, and it's regarding the manufactured home units and the manufactured home parks. So I'm assuming that the reason that's split out is that because sometimes people own their manufactured home but don't own the property it's on, and sometimes they own both. But does that mean if a person owns their manufactured home and the property it's on, that they would see an increase of 13%?
No, sorry, it's two separate things. The mobile home units, maybe I'll start with the parks. The mobile home parks, these are the larger entities that will have multiple units on that park. And so, for example, Chartwell or Park Meadows. So they do not, those individuals don't own their lot, they just own the unit. But the park owner will own the land and the improvements to it. So the park owner that owns the land and the improvements, such as the roads and any site improvements, that is the one that is the 5% increase.
Okay.
And just the manufactured home itself is 8%. And yes, there are some units that they may own the unit and the land, and those will be separate than the mobile home parks.
Thank you. If I may, one more question.
Yes, please.
I wondered if you could just refer back to, in your presentation, you talked about the multifamily 5 units or more, median change of 5% increase in senior multifamily facilities, median change of 7% increase. Sorry, could you just review again why you saw that large of an increase on those properties?
With the multifamily properties, these are also income-producing properties, so we're looking at the lease rates and reviewing lease rates from one year to the next. There was an increase in the lease rates, and the expenses did not increase at the same level, so therefore there's an increase in the assessment value.
So it's that the cost of rent or leasing increased, but the building owners had not done any work in the building. So you're basing the increase just on the lease or rent value, not on the actual property value. Is that correct? Because it's an income property.
Yeah, so we send out a yearly request for information to gain the information as far as the rental rates and the expenses that are incurred by the property owner.
If I could follow up on that. So the expenses would include capital expenses and operating expenses?
Yes, those, the operating costs are going to be yearly. The capital expenses will be amortized over a certain length of time.
Thank
So
you.
we're looking at the typical rates within similar type properties. So this next slide is just a timeline as far as the key events that we'll be seeing. So the evaluation date last July and condition date of December 31st. So any property that's at a progressive state will be assessed as of that state. The assessment notice is being sent out February 28th and complaint date of May 8th. And then the annual tax notice will come May 19th. And a second notice is a supplementary tax and assessment notice for any new construction or properties that have been completed during the year, which is prorated for the amount of months that they've been completed. So the next steps, with the tax notices coming out next week, we have noticed a land title delay up to 4 to 5 months receiving new ownership. So we encourage any new property owners that do not receive their notices to notify the customer service department. Also online, there is an area that you can submit your property and the ownership information so that you can receive a notice. Past council has made recommendation for our department to reach out to those property owners that are seeing an increase of 30% or more. And there's 7 properties that we'll reach out to. And for those properties that are increasing 20% or more in their current market value, we will send out a letter as well. And we only state the current assessed value. We don't have the previous value on there, and that's to bring the owner's attention to the current valuation, as that is the only value that may be appealed. If they are looking for their previous assessment value, that they can phone customer service department or the assessment department to get that value. We also have it posted on the city website with the previous year's assessment roll. And any questions that property owners have, they're encouraged to reach out, to phone, email, or visit our office. They can request their valuation details on their property, which is free, and those summary details are for the current valuation year only. Valuation details for a comparable property are $52.50 plus a processing fee. The city website is full of information. We have an assessment map that property owners can zoom in and look at the value of their property as well as surrounding properties. We also have information detailing how we've calculated the assessment values and the sales information. So assessment, if I was to summarize the assessment valuation, it's legislated by the province. The MGA and the regulation guide our valuation for regulated values and market value. And the duties of the assessor are to prepare assessments in a fair and equitable manner taking into consideration similar properties within the same municipality. And I thank you. Any other questions?
Yes, thank you very much. Councillor Hyder.
Thank you, Mayor Clark, through the chair. I appreciate your presentation tonight, Sue. That was well done, and it really helps people that don't understand taxing and assessing. It's just a real clear picture for us. I was just asking, when we talked about land title delay 4 to 5 months, but that's not on our organization, that's through the government, correct?
That's right. That's through Alberta land titles.
Yeah, and they're lacking in some boots on the ground is my understanding, is that people to actually do the processing. Yeah,
And we understand that the government is injecting money into that department in order to speed up that process.
right. I just wanted to make sure that if people were listening in or something, that they knew that it's kind of out of our hands. So thanks again, Sue.
If people are listening in. Councillor Dumanowski.
Excuse me, Your Worship. I thank you very much, Manager Strickenberg, for bringing us the assessment role. Not everyone will thank you, of course, because one thing is for certain, when you announce assessment role, it announces or a precursor to taxation. But one thing is for certain that you bring a high level and quality presentation. It's not easy to understand for everybody, and certainly not even for me. But after a number of years, it's starting to make sense. But what's important is to try and bring clarity to it. I appreciate the fact that you've indicated there are a number of ways that people can reach out if they have questions and just want some added clarity, or they wish to proceed with the challenge. But so as kind of a practice, I've over my years tried to highlight a few things because these are the common questions or points that I hear from the public. So if I can, Your Worship, take a moment. And then I do actually have a question. But as you indicated at the beginning, the quality standard has been met. One of the things that people sometimes, I don't want to say fail to understand, but fail to recognize is that we have metrics that are applied. There are processes that are followed as set out by the province, and the assessment rule has to be accepted before we can even proceed to the next step. So that just to indicate to the public that this isn't just kind of this unilateral kind of haphazard approach that we take. I highlight the fact that there is a 60-day complaint deadline only because I've had people remark to me that they had wished to or they had questions but had taken their envelope, like a lot of us do, and just put it to the side. Please open your assessment roll. It's clearly laid out as such, so open it up, have a look at it. The vast majority will not take exception to it or wish to challenge it for all the reasons. But there are some that will, and I've heard some say that it was unfortunate they missed the deadline because they didn't open it. Again, an indication, you've said it a couple times, one more time, July 1st is the date upon which the evaluation is completed, not today. People look at what's happening, certainly in the last few months. We've had significant fluctuations in inflation and other considerations, depreciation in some cases, sale prices, et cetera, and people will look at last week's numbers and not necessarily those of July 1st, so to highlight that. I noted the single-family median is 5%, the non-res is 2%. Again, I think those are indicative of a very reasonable assessment role. The overall assessment growth of 1.15% is actually good, favorable. What I wanted to, I guess, also highlight is that, and it kind of was highlighted in one of the questions from one of the councillors, I apologize, the reinspection cycle. So obviously when we look at the map, the reinspection cycle indicates those areas that had that done are seeing some of the, on the residential side, are seeing some of the greatest increases. I guess I can't help but think then, and I say this carefully, because if the city were in the position to do that in a greater capacity each year, arguably it would change the distribution of the role. based on increases. It seems that those areas that had a reinspection have seen some of the higher increases. So on the one hand, if we were to accelerate that, we would have rates that, or assessments that are a greater reflection of what the value is today versus having to wait to recoup some of that. The other side of it, of course, is if people had the reinspection done in a sooner fashion, I don't know how that would be possible, but in less than a 5-year cycle, the other argument would be they would see a more marginal increase, or potentially a marginal increase to their assessment, rather than this more bump at one swoop every 5 years. Now, that's working from the premise that everybody has reinspection, or the areas that have a reinspection are going to see a dramatic increase, but that's not always the case. Is that correct?
That's right, because there's two factors at play. We're looking at if there are any missing factors that we need to add to the assessment, but we also refer that to the sales that have taken place. So we use 3 years of sales. We're bringing them all, time adjusting them all to the same level of the previous July.
Okay. Just if I could, Your Worship. So thank you. And then the RFI acronym, request for information. Again, that's one I hear from the public, and you indicated they may be denied. I think historically, they often would be. I don't want to speak for the department, but if you don't fill out your request for information, you are essentially signaling to the corporation that you are not cooperative or not willing to give information. And often people are unwilling, I've heard, because they say it, because of course it's going to mean an automatic increase to my valuation, which they see as a direct correlation to increased taxes. But again, it's in people's interests. One of the things that we've mused, and I'll use the word mused about, is that nobody wants to see their evaluation or assessment go up, but when it comes to sales, they want to get the most for their home. And so it is a balance approach that people need to recognize is both prudent and worthy for them to have an assessment that reflects their value, but at the same time, because when they go to sell, most people are going to look at that assessment value of their home, which anybody can look up on the internet, and aren't necessarily going to see the market value of that home reflect a higher rate much more than the assessment roll. So it is a happy medium. I just want to say that when I look at the non-res and other distribution charts, and we see this huge bump in the middle, or the median indicates is close to the center point, and then we see these dramatic drop-offs on either side. I remember when municipal affairs was called in, because there was a lot of uproar in, I think you said 2012, about the changes in assessments, and I remember that vividly. I remember the representative from municipal affairs, who was standing right where you are, indicated that if we see these kinds of distributions, that is, in essence, quality assessment, meaning there are always going to be some, and he put it this way, and I'm going to recap what he said. You always see some drop-offs in a small amount to a significant amount, and those who have small increases to large increases, that essentially means in a true assessment role, half the public is under-assessed and half is potentially over-assessed. But the median is the indicator that we look at. And so when I see these kind of distributions, it indicates to me a healthy assessment, and the stratas that go within those are reflecting positively for the homeowner or the business owner and the municipality. So I do appreciate the presentation before us today, and I just want to thank you for the opportunity to ask you that question and share some thoughts.
Thank you. Seeing no further speakers on the speakers list, I will thank you for your presentation and encourage anyone who has questions about their assessment to contact your office. Not your, like the city, I guess, not you personally. Okay, we will move on now to committee commission business arising. At item 10.1, we have Corporate Services Committee meeting, minutes from February 9th, 2023.
I move that council adopts the minutes of corporate services meeting held on Feb. 9th, 2023 as presented for the corporate record.
And I'll second that.
Any errors or omissions? Seeing none, we'll vote on the motion. And that's unanimous. Moving on to item 10.1.2, 2023 tax auction reserve bids. Managing Director Egert, would you like to introduce this item?
Thank you, Mayor Clark. This item is before council as it relates to the legislative process on how City of Medicine Hat deals with those properties in tax arrears. We are recommending two things here in the briefing note. One is a minimum sales price, which is essentially the reserve bid. And the second one is related sale conditions that would apply to the public sale. In the briefing note, you'll see a list of properties. Prior to this going to auction, we expect and have already seen some of these properties that have fully paid their tax arrears. And so in the minutes of the meeting is the updated list, and we expect this list to be reduced further prior to the auction date of March the 1st. I will highlight as well, I mentioned this is a legislative process on following. We do have a little bit of flexibility in terms of when the auction takes place. I would like to reiterate that we have chosen the last possible legislative date to hold the auction, and that's in order to provide the owners of the properties time to arrange payment. In the brief note, you can also see the numerous contact points we've had with the property owners that include letters of notification, registration within land titles and notification of the same, advertisement of the public auction, which took place in January, letters of that advertisement, and then also home visits for those that don't have a financial charge on the property. What we're, again, requesting council to consider and to approve the minimum sale price, the reserve bid, and the related sale conditions.
Thank you, Managing Director Egert. Go ahead.
I move that council approves the minimum sale price and the sale conditions that apply to the public tax sale auction in accordance with section 419 and 436.1 of the MGA as presented.
And I will second.
Any discussion or questions for Managing Director Egert? Seeing none, we'll vote on the motion. And that is unanimous. We will now move on to item 10.1.3. Sorry, there's two information items on there, so we don't need to do anything with them, but if there are any questions about those two items. Councillor Hyder?
Not so much a question, but just maybe a comment about just information about at the City of Medicine Hat, we offer this wonderful program, Community Worth program, and in our corporate service meeting, we talked about it and how individuals can donate through on their utility bill, and I just would like to bring that up and make sure we share that with the public, that it's just a way to give back in your community. And and help people that are a little less fortunate so that we can make sure that everyone stays warm through the winter. And I think it is kind of it's a quiet program that people can get involved in their community, but it's just something you can do. You can add it right to your utility bills, so even $1 can come off your or be put on your bill. So if there's anything, Managing Director Eager, you'd like to add to that, but I think we forget about that program, and it's just a nice way to help out your fellow man through the season. So
Thank you. I think we're good. Oh, go ahead.
I appreciate those comments, Councillor Hyder, through the chair. And I do want to highlight that since the program was started in 2010, we've received a total donations of just shy of $300,000, which is incredible for the community. And with that, we've had the opportunity to support 577 families during that time. If there are members of the community interested in participating and giving back to the community, please call our customer service group, and they'll be glad to explain the program and show how members can actually register and be part of it. Thank you.
Thank you. And with that, Councillor Dumanowski, do you have any meeting highlights in addition to community warmth?
Your worship, I didn't share that date, but I can offer
My
comments.
apologies, Councillor Sharps.
Actually, one of the highlights was the community warmth, but thank you, Councillor Hyder, for doing that. One of the other things I wanted to just talk about was on the assessment. When I was chairing the meeting, I had lots of questions about the different properties and the taxes that were owed on it. And it's actually quite a lengthy, incredible process that the city goes through to make sure that people have every opportunity to pay their taxes. So just, I think people need to understand that, you know, we don't see the first tax bill not paid and send out a notice to take your house. So it's quite remarkable, the process. And even as we were sitting there in the meeting, there was items and homes coming off that list as they came to some arrangement. So just something to note, it's quite an intense process. And also one of the other key highlights for the meeting with me was the mental health and wellness training that the city's putting out for the employees. But if I could get Managing Director to actually speak about that a little bit, because I think it's a really good program that people need to understand.
Thank you, and through the chair, I am quite excited about this training, and I did participate myself. There will be more regarding this program that will be announced here in the next few weeks in terms of how the rest of the organization will be given this training. I will say that the training program was offered or presented through the Mental Health Commission of Canada. And they began the rollout with a leadership team, which I was a part of. And it's really intended to help employees better understand and recognize the challenges as it relates to mental health and reduce the associated stigma as it relates to mental health. So the training, as I mentioned, will be available for employees, and there'll be more announcements and dates in the coming months. And that includes council as well. So there'll be more coming, and we hope to have something at the Corporate Service Committee in terms of update.
Thank you. I was already bugging the HR department where council's training was, so it's nice to see that. Thank you.
We were invited.
I did reach out, but they changed the dates for
That
council.
did happen, yes.
Yes, it did.
Okay, so we'll move on now to item 10.2.1, Economic Land and Strategic Planning and Development Committee, meeting minutes of February 14th, 2023.
I move that council adopts the minutes of the Economic Land and Strategic Planning and Development Committee meeting held on February 14th, 2024, as presented for the corporate record.
I'll second.
Any errors or omissions? Seeing none, we'll vote on the motion. That's unanimous. Now we are at item 10.3.1, meeting minutes of the Public Services Committee meeting of February 13th, 2023.
I move that council adopts the minutes of the Public Services Committee meeting held on February 13th, 2023, as presented for the corporate record.
And I will second.
Any errors or omissions? Seeing none, we'll vote. That's unanimous. There are two information items in this section, Community Vibrancy Advisory Board and Committee outstanding items. Are there any questions or comments regarding those two items? All right, seeing none. Councillor Van Dyke, do you have any meeting highlights?
Yes, I will just bring one thing to the public's attention, and that's the Community Vibrancy Advisory Board. So that's a committee that reports back up through public services, and has a lot of community members on it, as well as some city administration and Councillor Robbins as well. And the minutes for those meetings are now being included in the public services agendas for the information of the public. They were not previously included, but it was felt that it was important that they come up through the public services meeting. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we are now at item 11, bylaws for second and third readings. Item 11.1, bylaw 4705, the outdoor smoking and vaping bylaw, sponsored by Public Services.
I move that council gives second reading of bylaw 4705, the outdoor smoking and vaping bylaw.
I will second that.
Thank you. Any discussion on this item? Councillor McGrogan.
Thank you. I have some comments, but I think we'll wait till after the third reading. Is that, what's the procedure?
Nope, we can go ahead now.
Thank you. I guess a couple of questions and comments. So reviewing this, I just note that outdoor public spaces is redefined from the original bylaw. And I'm just curious, the way it's worded, I'm really not sure, and I'd like some clarity, please, around whether or not an outdoor public space is just the three, the grandstand, the park, and the public event, or is it all land owned by the city? I guess that's kind of where this is whether publicly or privately owned, controlled, to which, I'm reading from page 50 of our agenda, G, which is the definition of outdoor public space. And it says it's whether public, privately owned, or controlled, to which members of the public have access or as of right or are expressly or impliedly invited to the space. So is it all space and it also includes that? And just, and by the way, here are three of them that are good examples, or is this, I guess if I'm standing in a field that the city owns, I want to know if that's a city space that's prohibited from smoking, and that's where I'm getting to with this. So I'd like just some clarity about what that means.
Interim Managing Director Stout.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through the chair to Councillor McGrogan. Certainly, outdoor public space is, as it's defined, any outdoor property that's publicly or privately owned or controlled. So in regards to your question about a city-owned field, yes, that's an outdoor public space. It includes anything that anybody can have access to or paid to have access to.
Councillor McGrogan.
Off. Sorry about that. So I guess part of that I'm getting to as well, I'd like to just comment or find, it says in the next section that a highway, inclusive of roads and sidewalks, are defined under the act. So it says it's not included. So a sidewalk is not included, is that right? And I have a follow-up to that.
Go ahead, Managing Director Stouth.
Thank you. Through the chair to Councillor McGrogan. Smoking is permitted on sidewalks and streets and highways. However, under provincial legislation and a current bylaw, you cannot smoke within 5 meters of a doorway to a building or a window that opens into a building. So those spaces are excluded. If you're outside of that area on a sidewalk or a roadway, you can smoke.
And then additionally, within 10 meters of the boundary of an outdoor public place.
Yes, thank you, Mayor Clark.
Okay, that's helpful, because it seemed to me, because I know we have a lot of multi-use trails that transition to sidewalks and back to multi-use trails, and so the clarity about the 5 meters from the, I guess, storefront helps. So thank you for that. And so generally, if you're on any city trail, you have to be 10 meters off the trail. So I mean, 30 feet, you've got to go off the trail to have a smoke, more or less.
Through the chair to Councillor McGrogan, our entire heritage trail system is included in the definition of our parks, so those would be no smoking areas.
Thank you.
Councillor Sharps?
So, yeah, I have a question. So I'm struggling with this a little bit, so, because I'm in the middle of nowhere, and if I walk my dogs, and there's always a gentleman that sits there and, you know, he smokes his medical cannabis, and I could care less. But he just, you know, sits on the bench and enjoys his cannabis, and he goes back in, and there's nobody but me and my dogs around there. Is this really, like, fine-worthy? Is this like, there's nobody there, and I'm not gonna call on him, but, I mean, how does that look as a city councillor walking by, and I know he's smoking this vape and he's enjoying every bit of it, but technically, he's not supposed to be on that sidewalk. Like, how, is this really enforceable, I guess, is my question, and is bylaw really gonna attend all of these calls? Because even apartment buildings, I mean, you get out your front door of an apartment building that's private, and you have to stand 5 feet away from any window, or 5 meters, is it? Whatever, what is it?
5 meters.
5 meters from a
From the doorway.
Right.
And then 10 meters from a public space.
Right, so I'm finding like where, and I'm not a smoker, but, so I'm, you know, not trying to smoke, you know, advocate for my rights. I did though, for 30 years, I lost a bet, so there you go, I was a smoker. But we are now, I'm still a little conscious on the fact that, where are they gonna go? Where, and then how do we enforce this, and is it enforceable?
Managing Director Stouth?
Thank you, Councillor Sharps, for the question. Through the chair to Councillor Sharps, that particular portion of the new bylaw is neither no more enforceable or no less enforceable than the old bylaw. Those exact conditions existed previously. The whole concept of updating the bylaw was to take the spaces where certainly youth may be present, parks, recreation areas, and reduce the ability to smoke any kind of product within those areas. So it's a youth-minded bylaw, health-minded bylaw. I'm happy to give council more context on the whole smoking bylaw if it would be helpful, because this has been in our community for some time waiting updates.
Why don't we go ahead, yes, sure.
Sure, thank you, Your Worship. So the original bylaw in Medicine Hat called the Smoke-Free Outdoor Public Places Bylaw was passed in or adopted in 2013, and council may remember there was some curiosity and some wondering what the province was going to do with no smoking legislation at that time. And the City of Medicine Hat was actually first to the plate with that, followed up by some changes by the province. So we've moved along. There's been a desire through Public Services Committee over the years to take a look at whether this bylaw needs updating. It was in fact December of 2016, when the latest presentation to Public Services Committee was made with recommendations from the Youth Advisory Board. And those recommended changes were looked upon favorably, and they mirror what we see here in the new bylaw. However, there was a desire to wait because we knew that the provincial government was going to make some, or anticipated we're going to make some changes regarding vaping. Those did occur, and then I think all you remember, the federal government legalized cannabis, and there was some discussion on waiting to see what the provincial government did with cannabis. So the provincial government did make changes in 2021 that involved cannabis as well. The new provincial legislation actually makes our bylaw 4053 not necessary because the provincial restrictions surpass that. What we've really done here is taken what's changed in the latest provincial legislation, and we have added the definition of a few outdoor spaces, including a grandstand, a skating rink or pond, basketball, tennis, or pickleball courts, and outdoor events such as markets, festival, fairs, exhibitions, concerts. So with those in mind, as I mentioned previously, those are the changes that we're proposing and recommending from a youth health protection standpoint.
Thank you. Do you have a follow-up? Councillor Van Dyke?
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to make a comment that came out of the Public Services meeting in which we discussed this at length, and that is regarding the fact that in Medicine Hat we have a lot of large parks. So I had a concern that I know that there's a lot of people that use medical cannabis and that they might have mobility issues, and if they were required to leave one of our city parks, which you have to drive into, a lot of them, Strathcona, Police Point, Kincooley, a lot of the larger parks, that it would be very difficult for them. And so I just wanted to make sure that people know that you are still allowed to smoke or use a vape or any kind of those devices in the parking lots within the parks. So just for clarity's sake, because there was some discussion around that. And Managing Director Stouth can correct me if I'm wrong, but we did have considerable discussion on that.
The
In the
question
parking
from,
lot, yeah.
clarification from City Manager Mitchell is that you don't have to be inside your vehicle. You can just be in.
You can be in the parking lot within one of the city parks, but it has to be the parking lot, yeah.
Councillor Dumanowski.
Your worship, I show number 2 here, but I'll go ahead.
Councillor Van Dyke just went, though.
Okay. Thank you, worship. These are always interesting conversations, certainly worthy of discussion around the table, and we're put in that position to act as representatives of the public, some of whom are users and some of whom are not. I certainly can speak for my experience around the table. I was there at the initiation of these bylaws, as you indicated, interim managing director, and one thing I've come to appreciate over time is that users, the vast majority, the absolute vast majority, have no problem being and working toward compliance of I guess a reality that has come to play out across the globe, never mind Medicine Hat. And certainly as a province who finally, after us taking the lead, followed our example and moved in that same direction. So as you had indicated, we are overlaying, we have the ability through our bylaws to overlay and designate things that are more robust or more specific than what the province lays out. And so my question maybe to start is the initiation of vaping, and I'm not gonna sit here and or attempt to delineate, but I do know some of the conversation I've had is around that. And can you speak to that a little bit first, just the onset, or maybe through the committee some of the conversation around the vaping overlay and the rationale, just high level. And then I'll have a follow-up.
Interim Managing Director Stout.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through the chair to Councillor Dumanowski, I'll try my best. So there were some changes in provincial legislation in relation to vaping, and as this new bylaw was contemplated, the concept of the bylaw was to address the behavior of smoking regardless of the product. So whether it was cigarettes, vaping, cannabis. I don't know if that's helpful for you in the context of this discussion.
Well, I'm not sure there's a perfect answer, but I do appreciate that comment. I do know, and the only rebuttal, the only communication I've had about the bylaw was from those who certainly in their mind's eye at least see vaping as slightly different. My research, you can Google all kinds of stuff, and you'll see data that indicates the vaping, the secondhand nature of vaping being not equivalent to other types of smoking or marijuana inhalation, and others that basically say it falls to the ground. It's benign in nature, in a very in a controlled environment, et cetera. So I take it and leave it to the experts to determine that, and its introduction and overlay obviously makes a lot of sense. Overall, my question kind of ties into some of the comments that have been said about compliance or people's ability. Certainly we know the introduction of vaping as at least initially as an alternative to other types of use was celebrated, and then it became quite well used, and there are a lot of, as you indicated, youth, which is troublesome, who are using it, and I think kind of like smoking many decades ago, we're starting to understand and make sense of this use and what its impact will be on the user, but ultimately on the indirect impact to the person who's nearby. And so that's really what we're talking about here. We're not trying to get into people's decision-making authority, but we're trying to help find that happy medium. So I will accept that, albeit I do know that there are many who fear that the vaping or perceive the vaping as being very different and having a different impact, and it's potentially because a lot of it is flavored and people don't psychologically see it as the same. But the concern that I've heard is the impact to enforcement, and that if we're not able to adequately or efficiently enforce, then introducing it is just an aggravating factor. So I suppose anytime government gets in the place of legislating or creating bylaws, there are going to be people who are in opposition to that. So the only other thing I have, and it's small considering that conversation, one is the conversation about designated spaces, and of course it does indicate here, and I admit I don't know. Is cannabis and tobacco? It says those cannot be consumed in the same temporary designated area. So is that a continuation of the bylaw, or was that a change? And then maybe I'll dovetail the second one. The temporary designated areas, there are some clear criteria there. One of the things I've heard, and I don't know how you would do it, but I have heard, and it makes sense, is that people have said that they like that at these events there are designated areas, and they respect that, but often the prevailing winds indicator doesn't work well. So you can put it over here, but all the prevailing wind blows it over the masses of the people. So I don't know how you would begin to put that in there, but is there any consideration to environmental factors at all in there? Because that kind of makes sense to me. At the same time, I'm not sure how you would enforce it.
Interim Managing Director Stouth.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through the chair to Councillor Dumanowski. Those are good questions, and I would point to development of a permit and the approval of the designated smoking areas that will be allowed through the introduction of this bylaw. And by the way, that's a change currently under 4136, the bylaw. If you were to have an outdoor festival in a park, there is no option for a designated smoking area. So under the new bylaw, the event coordinator can apply for a permit to have a designated smoking area. Yes, the areas for cannabis smoking and cigarette smoking and or vaping will be separated. So cannabis will be in one area, cigarette smoke in another area. They will not be the same. Regarding the prevailing winds, the only comment I have on that is when we're approving those permits, common sense.
Thank you very much.
Councillor McGrogan?
You're not done yet. No, I'm kidding you. I hate following Councillor Dubanowski, by the way, just for the record. So a couple things come out of that. I'm going to ask you a quick question about, so when somebody applies for a permit or a designated area, is there a fee for that permit? And if there's multiple designated areas, and it might have been in the policy below, if it did, I missed it. So that's question one, and I just have some comments to make after that.
Through the chair to Councillor McGrogan, you've got me on that one. I don't know if there's a permit fee for that or not, and I do not think there is, but I do know that that we've got Manager Shauna Dickey online, and she just texted me and said there's no fee.
Thank you.
Nothing like real-time info. So I guess I just want to follow up with what I've heard, and I'm not going to support this as it is for a couple of reasons. One is I think the outdoor public places is too vague. It's confusing because I had to ask the question, and I've read a lot of acts in my time. It was a little bit confusing about what it meant. The parks and such, I'm wondering, we didn't have vaping when this bylaw in 2013 came out, and we didn't have legalized cannabis, and we also didn't have pickleball that I'm aware of. So I guess a couple of things to consider. I'd love to see this come back a little tighter. Again, it's going to be council that decides, but I'd really like to see outdoor spaces worded in such a way that people still have some ability. And I guess everybody has to go on the record and say, I've never been a smoker, so I'm going to say that. But it just seems extremely restrictive to those people that do have, that do smoke, and I understand that cannabis has a certain odor to it, which is some people find repulsive, but it's been legalized. So anyway, I don't support it for that reason. I'd like to see it tightened up. I don't know if we need to name all these parks and stuff. We could just say our parks and trail systems, because I think maybe our pickleball court is specified for a reason, but I can't imagine what it would be. It just seems really onerous. I think it could be tighter, and thank you.
Managing Director South?
Thank you, Your Worship, and through the chair to Councillor McGrogan, one thing we need to understand as we consider this bylaw is those broad definitions of outdoor spaces are defined in the Tobacco Smoking and Vaping Reduction Act. That's provincial legislation. So what we're doing with this bylaw is we're not adding any more broad definitions to it. In fact, we're quite succinctly defining a grandstand, a skating rink or pond, a basketball, tennis, or pickleball court, and open festivals. So those are the areas that we are adding over and above the provincial legislation that came into place in July of 2021.
Follow-up?
So you're telling me that our provincial legislation, through the chair, sorry, it keeps it, people are prohibited from smoking out in the middle of a field. I got to go to that one because it's the extreme of, I guess, what it could look like if you had maybe an overzealous enforcement unit, whatever the case might be. I just want to know, I guess my question is that also a provincially legislated bylaw, or not a bylaw, provincial law? And then secondly, I guess I'm wondering why we'd need to repeat it. So there's my two questions.
Managing Director Stouth?
Through the chair to Councillor McGrogan, the field concept that you speak of is, yes, that would apply if the public has access to it. If you're talking about a privately owned farmer's field, well, no, it wouldn't. But a field that has a park that has public access, whether it's paid admission or free admission, yeah, that would apply. And so our bylaw certainly includes the definitions, and you may call it repeating. I guess it's open to interpretation, but I really want to stress what we're doing with the bylaw is adding those specific items in the briefing note.
Councillor Hirsch?
It's interesting times. Never thought I could see where you can't smoke in a park, but yet you can drink alcohol. It's just quite bizarre for me, but so I get the struggle of what administration's trying to do here. I really do. You know, but I just find it when I start connecting the dots, like, so a person that wants to go for a walk and not hit a golf ball cannot smoke, but you can smoke on a golf course. But yet, I'm pleased to see the campground. The last time this came in front of me, I recall this because I was pretty passionate on the campground. Because the argument that I had, that I see it's in here, is that a person technically leases that lot and it's their ownership for a predetermined amount of time, so they should be able to enjoy their property. So I appreciate the effort, again, to try and capsulize something that is a bit of a difficult thing to capture. The only problem that I see is that we've got counselors here going scratching heads, and we're supposed to be entrusted to understand this whole policy and make sure, but yet the average citizen is gonna be completely, utterly not understanding when, and I think for the most part, they understand the 5 meters. It's kind of like, and you indicated it, Mr. Stout, that common sense should prevail. And I remember a former police chief that I learned these words a long time ago, who said, bylaws are just can't we get along rules? And I remember that, and I really want to visit that idea because I think that's the intention here. I get it, is that we're trying to make people to understand if you're gonna have a cigarette, please just kind of take your act and go somewhere else where it's not necessarily gonna be impactful to residents, and I get it. But I feel in some ways, and I'm gonna use the wrong word because it's not a bylaw infraction, it certainly is not criminal, but you've got well-intended people that kind of don't know where they're gonna be able to go for their cigarette or their vape. But yet, I guess I'm getting to my question right away here is the word common sense came in. So if we were to pass this, and I'm a bit awestruck in the fact that a person that wants to go for a walk and utilize our trails can't even smoke. They'd have to go, and I'm visualizing Ross Glen, for example, the back. They'd have to walk through essentially unmanicured areas for their cigarette, which would almost be a fire hazard. So I'm trying to think of that. So forgive me, I'm just speaking out loud, but that's why I go back to I'm really tossed up on whether I support this or not, just because where we're at in the whole world of common sense in terms of, and I get what staff's trying to do in terms of bringing this forward, but for me, as a sitting councillor, it's confusing, but yet again, I can't imagine the taxpayer. So to my question, that all said, you've got bylaw enforcement. what level of autonomy are they gonna be able to have to, in the world of common sense? And we all know there's vigilantes out there or whatever that'll say, foul, phone, whatever. If there's well intentions along this road for people that smoke, what are we gonna do with those well-intentioned people that might be on or offside on this bylaw? I just need to understand that, because that's where the rubber hits the road for me. If we kind of all concede, hey, you know, technically, friend, you should be kind of somewhere else, but I just need to understand kind of what level of enforcement we're gonna be doing on this, if that helps.
Interim Managing Director Stout? If you don't mind, I'm going to go to City Solicitor Bullock first. He has his hand up. Go ahead, City Solicitor Bullock.
Good evening. Thank you, through the chair. I just wanted to add to some of the comments made by Managing Director Stout. I guess more in response to the concerns raised by Councillor McGrogan. So the definition of outdoor public place, it was shrunk from this amending bylaw shrinks it. And the reason for that is when the provincial legislation was amended a few years ago, we found that there was overlap between the bylaw and the provincial legislation. And so anywhere where the province is already regulated, we took that out of our bylaw. There was no need to have it in our bylaw and in the provincial legislation. So things like playgrounds. So if you look at the provincial legislation, it's specific about certain types of outdoor areas like playgrounds, sports fields, skate parks, and so forth. So if there was any overlap, we took it out of our bylaw. And so what you have here is an attempt to fill gaps that staff saw in the provincial legislation where smoking and vaping wasn't regulated. So I don't know if that helps answer some of your concerns, Councilor McGrogan.
Just could I follow up? Sorry. But aren't all of the places you mentioned as overlaps included in the definition of outdoor public place by virtue of the clauses prior to and includes the following?
Well, no, I think, the intent was to remove any overlap. So, I mean, I'm not sure if I'm answering your question, Mayor Clark, but that was the intention.
The definition of outdoor public place is any outdoor property, whether publicly or privately owned or controlled, to which members of the public have access to as a right. Playground would be included in that, a skate park, and so on.
No, I don't, because it says it includes the following. So it has a list of grandstand, park, and a public event.
But isn't includes meaning examples rather than an exhaustive list?
That wasn't the intent.
Okay, so we got a bit different answer from Interim Managing Director Stouth, I think, on that one. So Councillor Hirsch, your question was directed to Interim Managing Director Stouth, so go ahead.
Thank you. Through the chair, the examples you phrased, Councillor Hirsch, are already there today under the bylaw, so I wouldn't tell a bylaw officer how to do their job. I would suggest that the enforcement that you would see tomorrow would be similar to what it is today.
So just follow up, and it just got clarified to me, but it led to my next question, is that I understand now the provincial guidelines were redacted or removed because of redundancy. However, I guess based on what we know relative to provincial guidelines versus what we're recommending, are they stronger? Is our bylaw relative to others, I guess, or provincial mandates, is this a stronger bylaw that is more limiting to smoking and vaping than the average municipality and/or provincial guidelines?
Interim Managing Director Stout.
Through the chair to Councillor Hirsch, so yes, it does exceed provincial, exceed provincial guidelines in the areas of the expanding definition of outdoor public spaces to include a grandstand, skating rink or pond, courts, and festivals and events. So yes, it is greater. And in the package, we include a chart of the municipal bylaws. I'll have to scroll through it here. And the comparison from other municipalities.
Page 200.
Thank you.
Is this, though, including what is already under the provincial legislation or what they have added in addition?
That I don't know for sure. I'm still trying to find it. Did you say page what?
200. Oh, that's my bad. I was looking at our last council's agenda because my notes are in there. Sorry. So it would be. I don't know if it's in this one. I don't think it's in this one. But it is in last council agenda.
Just looking for it. Bear with me for a minute. It isn't in this package. So we did include an Alberta municipal bylaw chart that talks about,
It's on our screen, but could we have it like way, yeah. I don't even know if, so the top row says municipality, playgrounds, park, sports fields, facilities, beaches, outdoor markets, outdoor events, trails, tobacco sales, licensing, smoke-free hotel guest rooms, some of which I'm quite certain are regulated under the provincial legislation.
some of that will be, and I'm going to call on Manager Shauna Dickey to see if she can enlighten us on this chart.
She hasn't texted you yet?
Not yet.
I was just getting to that.
Go ahead.
So I can tell you there's 42 municipalities or towns on this chart, which isn't all of Alberta, obviously. But these are the municipalities or towns that have implemented an additional bylaw on top of the provincial regulations. And of these 42, 37 of them have implemented vaping, extra vaping regulations. 15 out of 42 are across the board, like have hit everything: playgrounds, parks, beaches, outdoor markets, outdoor events, which is what we're looking at. 17 out of 42 have included outdoor markets and events. So I'm not sure what you're looking for as far as how many or what municipalities, what the normal is. But there is a large majority of municipalities and towns looking at implementing additional restrictions. Cochrane, Leduc, and Grand Prairie as well are working on some additions as well. At least those three, and maybe more. I'm not sure.
Are they truly additions, though? Because the provincial legislation now regulates vaping, and the Gaming, Liquor, and Cannabis Act, I think that's what it's called, is a public place includes a place or building that is open to the public. I'm assuming the Tobacco Act is similar. Is that more your question? Are other municipalities exceeding the provincial standards? Councillor Hirsch?
Well, I'm just trying to get an understanding and relative maybe to our municipal peers. Are we stronger in our bylaws? So it sounds like we are one of 15 from what I just heard across the province. So we're probably in the top quartile of more restrictive tobacco and vaping bylaw announcements as you just indicated. So I just wanted to get a sense of where we're at as far as this bylaw relative to our peers. So I appreciate that. And if I'm wrong on the 15, but I heard that we're one of 15 that are higher level, if you will.
Can you confirm that, Manager Dickey?
That is correct.
That we are one of 15 that have exceeded Alberta.
Yeah, so one of 15 that has most of these checked off, other than tobacco sales licensing and smoke-free hotel guest rooms. But all the other ones, if we implemented these additional changes to outdoor markets and outdoor events, then we had hit all of those check boxes, which 15 others have done.
But the public definition of public place in the legislation includes a place or building that is open to the public. So like what is an open market? Is that not included?
It is not. That is a loophole in the existing bylaw or existing regulations.
Okay. Follow up?
Well, just a comment. I'm just really, I'm resonating towards Councilor McGrogan's point about, and I'm just envisioning, and I'm sorry, you've got employees that would take a cigarette break, traditional, they would go outside. They would literally have to now, I guess they could go on the sidewalk, be in X amount away. I'm just having difficulty because now a person technically, because that's still public or private property, could walk upon that person and then deem them inadequate or not on the side of the bylaw, to be honest. And I guess the struggle is, we could say, take this back and wordsmith it again, but I guess I still struggle on how do you encapsulate the can't we get along world? And I am really conflicted in terms of which way I'm gonna go on this, but I'll figure it out. Thank you.
Councillor Sharps?
Sorry, I meant to undo that. I apologize.
Councillor Van Dyke?
Yes, just a couple of things. I think to Councillor Hirsch's comment, I think this bylaw will not actually alter people's ability to go outside of buildings and smoke because those exist under the previous provincial legislation. I could be wrong on that one, but I guess, and also when you say, can't we all just get along in common sense? And I know we all know the saying, common sense is not always that common. And that, I guess, in my view, we know there are going to be people pushing the boundaries, and I look at it from a perspective as a mother of teenagers and having been involved with a lot of school stuff and my children's friends and seeing the impacts and influence of smokers in their lives and the perception that comes across. And I think the City of Medicine Hat was very courageous early on to make early decisions around bylaws to protect children, their physical health, and I think the social impacts of smoking. And I think that we can do the same again here now. I'd be very curious to hear Councillor Dumanowski's perspective as a principal and an educator of children as well. I'm sure he has a lot of experience of seeing the impacts on smoking in kids that he works with as well. But that's my perspective.
Thank you. City Manager Mitchell?
Thank you, through the chair. I just had a question for Managing Director Stouth. If you can just explain, for my background and perhaps members of the public, you said that the impetus was this on some response from youth groups. Can you expand on that? If you were involved in the process then?
Well, it was a little before my time in this chair by several years, but I certainly can tell you that I did look back in the December minutes from Public Services Committee where there was the URAB board was supporting the Youth Advisory Board. We used to have a lot of boards in the city. We don't have as many now, but was supporting recommendations from the Youth Advisory Board to expand the definition of open spaces as far as the smoking bylaw is concerned. Committee of the day was generally supportive of those recommendations. However, as I mentioned, there was certainty that changes in provincial legislation were afoot. And that certainly caused the delay. We may have been better off if the province had acted sooner on some of the changes they did. It might have been easier for us to manage. But if I can just take a second to comment on the confusion of where somebody steps outside their building for a smoke break, that hasn't changed. It hasn't changed. And yes, there are some changes in relation to grandstands, skating rinks, et cetera. But we certainly know that if this bylaw is passed, we'll want to do some education through our corporate communications department as far as what those changes would look like. In reality, they're quite minimal. You know, we've expanded the definition to include a grandstand. Well, we have grandstands at the Stampede and Exhibition, but you can't smoke in them today anyway. So it isn't as sweeping change as one might think it is, and we do have the opportunity to run some public education components with this.
Do you mind if I wedge in, Councillor Dumanowski? Thank you. So my main concern is that we're adding things and the province has added things. Our bylaw is a 10-meter distance. The Alberta, from outdoor public spaces, the Alberta legislation is 5 meters. I'm just wondering what the value added here is. So has anyone mapped out where you actually can and can't smoke currently if we just do the provincial legislation versus where you can and can't smoke when it's a 10-meter distance? I'm struggling to understand how you could smoke in a parking lot of a park if you're not 10 meters away from that park, even if you're in the parking lot. Be the same with sidewalks. You can smoke on a sidewalk if you're also 10 meters away from an outdoor public space. Yeah, so I'm just a little bit, and I, like everyone else, not a smoker. I do truly care about the health of children in our community and adults alike. I just am not sure if there's even added value in terms of getting that protection with these additions. And it's then just creating this overlap and multiple jurisdictional regulation of the same thing when it may not be necessary. Councillor Dumanowski?
Well, Your Worship, I had one crack at this. I probably would be wise to not say any more, but I will. I recognize the challenge before us, and I, as has been of late clarified, largely we are just making some additional provisions for restrictions around park, swim, lake, beach, outdoor rink, pond, pickleball spaces, and I think that in and of itself is probably the most, if there's going to be anything contentious, that's probably the biggest part. I'm going to remind myself and maybe have you bear with me, but when we made the introduction of no smoking in public spaces, I was on the council, and you want to talk about a humdinger, that was one. That took a lot of consideration to move ahead with. The province followed suit. We've since had to repeal or had the need to repeal our bylaws around a lot of that because the provincial legislation took over. But obviously we're strengthening, tightening, defining some areas that maybe are Medicine Hat centric, and that's what we're really dealing with here today. I want to speak to, because it's like part of what we're hearing today is almost a reintroduction of the provincial mandate, which is what it's not. And I feel like we're losing a little bit of our presence in that. And when we talk about enforcement, first of all, let's back up. Nobody is trying to vilify anybody who is a user of cannabis, cigarettes, or vaping. We all have people. I don't smoke, I don't vape, but I know people who do. I have family who do. So when I look at this in the context of family, friends, and community, and certainly nobody. My attempt to support this is not to vilify anybody or segregate. Social norms have evolved, and anyone that wants to take exception to that would certainly be challenged by the overwhelming presence of change that we've seen in Medicine Hat and across our country and elsewhere. Again, the province has largely dictated what is and what isn't to be. As far as enforcement, and we're working from the premise that every time somebody is seen, they're going to get a ticket. I don't want to put Councillor Grogan, but I always do that on the spot in his role in the police service for decades. When we had that bylaw introduced, we worked from their premise and certainly tried to socialize it from the context of let's educate people. Let's just educate. We're not going to go ticket happy. And I remember at some point we asked for data after the first year or two, how many tickets had actually been issued, and I think it was next to none, because the idea was to hold true to that. Let's educate. Let's help people understand. So the truth of the matter is, no matter what, whether it's provincial legislation or an overlay of a bylaw, we're going to have councillors, we're going to have the public who are always going to misunderstand or misconstrue what is within boundaries and what is not. But our role, our citizen-wide role, and certainly bylaws, is to educate and to help people understand. And I firmly believe that that has been the mainstay of all of the legislation since its initiation, and it won't change here. But I'll end with the added clarity, I think, helps in very specific things within Medicine Hat, and ultimately the Tobacco Reduction Act or the other provisions within that are to help protect the rights of users, but at the same time protect the health of everybody. And I don't think these additions are so drastic that we have the need to fear it, and so I'm going to support it.
Okay, Councillor Hyder. Well, for me, I don't think we really know where people can smoke and can't smoke right now. So I don't think any of us are, well, I'm not opposed to the bylaw in principle, but it just, to me, it's not clear to me where in the city smoking is permitted currently. Like if we pass this bylaw, which I think would be helpful information to know before proceeding with this bylaw.
Your Worship, I'm going to entertain a juxtaposition. It's kind of like the responsible pet ownership and the off-leash, on-leash. Do we have clarity around that? I mean, we need to gain clarity. I'm not suggesting we don't, but what is that going to be, an appendix to the bylaw that we will delineate where you can vape, where you can smoke cannabis, where you can smoke cigarettes? I think getting clarity is going to be a necessity, but I think that's going to be an ongoing provision with this bylaw and these enhancements. So for me, it certainly shouldn't be a reason why we wouldn't support it, but I understand your question.
Thank you, Councillor Hyder.
Sorry, I'm just going to chime in here. I'm not going to be supporting it for many things that have been said around the table. So just so that you have my answer, I seem to be I'm feeling a little under the weather here if you can't tell, but I just wanted to chime in. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor McGrogan.
So I'll be quick, but for the record, I want to get it straight. So what I said was, there's criminal laws, there's provincial laws, there's the manners your mom and dad taught you, and then there's municipal behavior bylaws. So that's what I always used to say when I'd have to come to council to talk about stuff like this. And I support some of the great work that's here. I just want to be very clear about that, and I understand our need to protect our youth. It's just too ambiguous for me, and I'd hate to see it defeated and then it's put on the back shelf and never looked at again. I think we could come up with something that doesn't exceed provincial legislation and we just need to update what we have already. I would support that, but again, I won't support this. Thank you.
City Manager Mitchell.
I was going to add that certainly, sorry, through the chair. I was going to add that certainly we will make sure that if it is approved, that we will make sure that the public is very clear on everything through the engagement and through the public engagement piece, if that is the will of council.
But could you add that clarity for us?
Yes.
So before we pass the bylaw?
Yes, that would have been helpful. If there's also the will of council that there isn't enough clarity around this, we can certainly bring it back at the March 6th meeting and clarify that. That's an option too.
Interim Managing Director Stouth.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just wanted to clarify a couple of things. The confusion between 5 meters and 10 meters, the 10 meters from outdoor spaces exists in the bylaw today. So we haven't changed that. What we have done is we've added those 4 categories that we spoke about, and then we're creating a mechanism by which event holders can apply for a permit to actually have designated smoking areas that they wouldn't have been able to have under the bylaw today. So I just want to touch to, as far as public consultation goes, we did have a face-to-face session. We only had 12 people that came to that session to speak to it. We did online surveys on it, and we had 463 people respond to the online survey with a high percentage supporting these kind of changes to the bylaw. And having said that, I'm happy to go back and look at providing whatever clarity you want to see on this.
Okay, so I think you need our outdoor public places definition is much broader than just 4 places or 3 places. And it actually, in my view, includes all the public events that are specifically listed as well. So I think there may need to be some refinement there. Councillor Van Dyke.
City Manager gave the response that I was going to suggest.
Okay. So there's no further speakers. I think additional clarity may be helpful, but I'm not sure if someone wants to make that motion or there's a will to do a vote on the second reading. But if we're not going to vote on the second reading, I will need a motion to do something other than that. City Clerk.
Thank you, Mayor Clark. There is a motion on the table that needs to be addressed by council.
But can't it be postponed? Can't someone make a motion to postpone?
Your Worship, I'd like to make a motion to table this, postpone. We don't use table anymore? Okay.
I think
Until
table
the
is
next
bring it
council
back.
meeting.
Okay.
Yeah, with provision of additional information and clarity as requested by council.
Second.
All right, we will vote on the motion to postpone. That's unanimous. Excellent discussion. Is there sufficient clarity, City Manager Mitchell? Okay. Moving on to unfinished okay, so the unfinished business is the designated smoke and vape area management policy. Do we similarly want to postpone this? I think there's a recommendation to pass the policy.
Your Worship, I'd ask that we concurrently postpone that item until the next meeting.
I'll second.
Thank you, and we will vote on the motion to postpone. That's also unanimous. Moving on to new business, item 3.1, Municipal Planning Commission disbandment. Sponsor is Strategic Management and Analysis. Go ahead.
Just wanted to see if this is my cue. Your Worship, in lieu of the motion that Councillor Van Dyke was going to make, I actually, based on council and discussion, I move that council postpone this item to a future council meeting and direct administration to conduct a thorough public stakeholder engagement process approved by City Manager Mitchell. So I'll just,
second that.
if I can speak after I get a second.
Yeah, so we now have a seconder. I have City Manager Mitchell, would you?
Yep,
That's
sure.
okay?
Go ahead.
And then we will give you an opportunity to speak to your motion.
I just want to publicly apologize to Councillor Hirsch as the chair of the committee and also to the members of the MPC, because I don't think that we did a good and thorough job of how we engaged the committee, and we want to apologize for that. So we want to make sure that the process going forward, if that's council's direction, that it's more robust and involves everybody who needs to be involved.
Councillor Hirsch?
Thank you, City Manager. Appreciate the commentary. I think just because this got into the public sphere, it's just important for us to kind of understand really how we got there. I think, as City Manager indicated, there's just been, a series of missteps, and I think the intentionality was there, but I think it didn't necessarily land us to where we wanted to be. So unfortunately, there was a reach out to the community, affected parties prematurely, which in technical terms means that this is before council was able to review it, which would have been tonight. So essentially, the cart was put in front of the proverbial horse. My personal position on this remains the same. I think, or perhaps it may change as we do further review, so I appreciate the commentary. So I think as we move forward, it'll be interesting to see where the position is. I think one of the things that I really maybe took some umbrage on is that there was a series of emails that was sent back to my attention indicating a little bit of attack on my integrity in terms that I might have spearheaded this. And in fact, I was not. it was, again, well-intentioned, and I think, I don't fault anyone at that regard, but I think it's just important to clear the air, that that wasn't the case at all. I'm not necessarily impressed with the execution. I find as we move forward, the rationale as it stands right now, we're just gonna remove that and take it back to administration. Just the optics for me at this point in time didn't sit well as far as how the whole process laid out. So I think in order for us to kind of retrace our steps, look at this with a renewed understanding of how we move this forward, I'm prepared to kind of go that way, but I appreciate the fact to clear the air, so thank you.
Thank you. Seeing no further speakers, we'll vote on the motion to postpone this item. And that is unanimous. Moving on to item 13.2, tri-municipal growth and wastewater study. And the sponsor is Strategic Management and Analysis.
No, it's actually coming from intermunicipal, I believe. This started in intermunicipal initially.
Okay. So do you want to speak to it?
I am,
Okay.
absolutely. Whereas the tri-municipal intermunicipal collaboration framework identifies a tri-municipal growth and water and wastewater study as a high priority, and whereas the Alberta Community Partnership provides grant funding for intermunicipal projects. Therefore, be it resolved that the City of Medicine Hat Council supports this grant application for this strategic regional initiative and confirms that the City of Medicine Hat is directly involved in the project and designates the City of Medicine Hat as managing partner for this project.
I'll second that.
Thank you. Would you like to speak to the motion?
I can very briefly. When we were in intermunicipal, our last meeting, 60 days ago now, there's lots of conversation surrounding, initially the growth of how do we get to our number of over 100,000. And one of the key things that came up was water. Do we have the water? And interesting enough, we had Cypress County there, we had Redcliffe, and it was a very robust conversation. But as we proceeded, we really don't have that answer. So we need to check that out, and that's what I believe it went from our group to ELSPD and ended up here. But we need to drive down those numbers and find out, do we have the numbers to get to the grand plan of 100,000?
Thank you. Is there anything, additional comments from administration side? Oh, Councillor Dumanowski.
Your Worship, I was just going to add to what Councillor Sharps indicated. This has flowed through the intermunicipal committee. And the nice thing, I mean, obviously when people see the word study, they see dollars and cents tied to it, but just to give indication to the public that there's a grant that our staff was able to secure that they believe will cover the vast majority, if not all of the costs of the study. This is a study that all the municipal county of Cypress, Redcliffe and us would agree to in order to move forward with this. And as I understand it, there is agreement, and certainly at the intermunicipal committee level there was. These grants sometimes come and go quickly. In the Alberta Community Partnership one came, our staff, kudos to them for identifying it and applying for it and securing it. So this is an important and integral part of our growth strategy, and all of us, quite frankly, because we all are neighbors and our boundaries are touch at certain points, obviously, and our growth strategy, all three municipalities have a need to understand the water wastewater component associated with that, and this grant will secure that understanding for us. So I'm pleased that it's here before us.
Managing Director Pancoast.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just wanting to offer one clarification. We have applied for the applicable grant, but it is not yet confirmed. This will form part of the package. So this offer for support letters from each of the municipalities will help towards that end as part of that application process.
Thank you. I don't see any other speakers, so we'll vote on the motion. And that's unanimous. Can we have this item added to an outstanding items list? It appears that, I guess it doesn't say when we would expect. So confirmation of funding, end of March 2023, and then the study will occur, and I think we would expect a report back on that to council or committee at that point. Thank you. Item 3.3 is next, amendment to wastewater agreements with Cypress County.
I move that council approves the execution of an agreement to amend the wastewater agreement with Cypress County to allow for expiration of the agreement no later than May 31st, 2034.
I'll second.
Would you like to speak to the motion?
Sorry, I just have to find it in here. Sorry, I'm in the wrong one. This is just bringing into alignment two agreements that we have that currently have different expiration dates. And it has gone already to Cypress County, which has to approve this as well. If Managing Director Maines has anything additional to add.
Thank you through the chair. Thank you, Councillor Van Dyke. Yes, as very accurately spoken, over time, the two services have now different dates for the expiry of the services. We cannot have one without the other. We need the wastewater for the water. So the request tonight is to bring these two agreements into alignment in terms of their termination dates for council. We believe that this will be supported by the county as well. And we believe this is in the best interest of the city of Medicine Hat.
Thank you. Seeing no further speakers, we can vote on the motion. And that's unanimous. The next item up is the item 3.4, which is Public Services Committee appointment. I added this item because in light of the addition of a new committee, but we're working to realign workload for various councillors, and to that end, Councillor Hyder has expressed an interest in being part of the Public Services Committee, and many people will know that she already regularly attends those meetings. And so I think I would recommend that Councillor Van Dyke would how do I say this? Be off. Removed is it seems like a harsh term, but yeah, so that Councillor Hyder would replace Councillor Van Dyke on the Public Services Committee.
So I'll move the council approve the mayor's appointment of Councillor Hyder to the Public Services Committee in place of Councillor Van Dyke pursuant to Procedures Bylaw 2270.
I'll second.
All right. Any speakers? Seeing none, we will vote on the motion. And that's unanimous. Really glad that you voted in favor of that, Councillor Hyder. Would you like to just provide a few words?
Sure. Thank you for that, Mayor Clark, through the chair. Yeah, I do attend 8 a.m. every Monday or every other two. I think public service is just something I'm familiar with in the city. In my other job, there's just a lot of things that flow into the Public Service Committee. I'm looking forward to trying something new and expressing, my thoughts and concerns and working with Brian. So it'll be interesting and I'm excited. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hyder. Councillor Hirsch?
As indicated, I supported the request. And the only reason I did that is I know we're going to be doing a fairly comprehensive review of all our committee structure and who's on the committees and that sort of thing. So I do feel like this is an interim measure until we get our feet underneath us in terms of the committee. So thank you.
Thank you. Moving on to item 13.5, oh, we did. Yeah. Never hurts to check, though. Item 13.5, a ratification of Medicine Hat Police Service Collective Agreement. Councillor Dumanowski?
Your Worship, whereas the collective agreement between the City of Medicine Hat and the Medicine Hat Police Association, as well as the collective agreement between the City of Medicine Hat and the Medicine Hat Police Senior Officers Association, both expired on December 31st, 2020. And whereas as a result of the good faith efforts made to renew both agreements, I move that the memorandums reached between parties concerning collective agreements for the term of January 1st, 2020 to December 31st, 2024, and providing inter alia for the following general wage adjustments are hereby approved and ratified. 2.5% effective January 1st, 2021, 2.5% effective January 1st, 2022, 2.5% effective January 1st, 2023, and 2.5% effective January 1st, 2024.
Second.
Councillor Hirsch?
Well, Your Worship, I'm going to support the recommendation, and I just think a couple comments is probably appropriate. I appreciate the efforts of both parties coming to this realization and what we see in front of us tonight. It's an interesting time that we see in my day job. I'm very tied and pay attention to economic forces, and that includes inflation. All of us know, and we've heard it numerous times on the news, that inflation's hovering at 7%, and inflation's hovering now, I just heard it today, it's creeping down to 5%. So, I think what I like about this, quite frankly, is it is a realistic settlement that really speaks to what normality is, because right now we're not in a normal course of affairs. Typically, Bank of Canada likes to have inflation hovering around the 2 to 2.5%. So therefore, you see that in front of you. So in a normal cause of affairs, obviously, this bargaining group never wants to see themselves or their salaries get ate up by inflation. In fact, the argument is that they would take a step backwards. It's always a sensitive topic when you do negotiations, so I appreciate, again, the efforts that were done. But for those parameters of where we're at right now to what this agreement signifies, I'm supportive. Thank you.
City Manager Mitchell?
Through the chair, just to further expand on that too, that the funds that are needed to meet this wage increase have been budgeted for, so there will be no expanse to the budget.
Thank you. Councillor Dumanowski?
Your Worship, I think Councillor Hirsch said it very well. The only thing I wanted to add is, because I know there will be some out there who will look to this favorably. Many will disregard it and some will not be in favor of it. I can assure the public that the interests of both the service and the senior members and that of the corporation, the municipality, the taxpayer have been served well here. These are not easy negotiations, but are served well when both parties enter in good faith, and that was done here. As has been indicated with inflationary indicators, we will see, and we expect to see some general wage adjustments. These are very reasonable. I'm very pleased, quite frankly, in the context of a 4-year agreement, albeit we are essentially 3 years into that agreement. It does create stability, certainty, and value, I think, for both the corporation and the service. So I'm very pleased. I want to demystify to the public, and I'm hopeful that we don't have calibrations or calculations of where our service is relative to other services, et cetera. We value our members. We value the safety that we inherently gain by having a service that feels valued. I hear from almost no one who questions that. And so for me, this is an indication that we have not only met our required need to work and come up to an agreement as per the need as indicated in 2021 and now to 2024, but ultimately that we are expressing our support for service and for the taxpayer one and the same. This is a happy medium. I will end by saying the worst case scenario would be with a bargaining group like this that we are forced because of a lack of reasonableness or good faith bargaining to go into interest arbitration, which some services in the province are moving toward, unnamed, and that's a difficult situation. So I'm very pleased again, and I'm thankful and hopeful that Council will endorse this today.
Thank you. Seeing no further speakers, we'll vote on the motion. And that is unanimous. Moving on to item 13.6, appointment of public members. City Clerk?
Thank you, Mayor Clark. This item is coming forward to council today. There are still 3 vacancies on our various boards and committees, and council has considered some options for public member appointments. So for the Assessment Review Board, Susan Oxford received the highest number of votes. For the Combative Sports Commission, Brian Armstrong received the highest number of votes. And for the Municipal Planning Commission, Corey Cuthbertson received the highest number of votes.
Your Worship, I move that council appoints the public members who received the highest number of votes as read into the record, each for a term ending December 31st, 2025.
I'll second that.
City Manager Mitchell?
I would just like to add too that we thank everybody who put their applications forward, and there's a lot of work to be done and a lot of public engagement, so we'll be looking forward and somebody will be in contact with you shortly.
Thank you. Seeing no further speakers, we'll vote on the motion. That is unanimous. Seeing no further business, this meeting is adjourned.